Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Server-Side Web Development. This is Lecture 3. Today, we're going to be covering predefined variables. We'll be discussing them in kind of breaking them up. We'll discuss them in parts. We'll also be covering includes. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of topics right there, but it's actually a lot of information, so we're going to be quite busy today. We have a participation assignment today, Amazing Adventure, which we'll work on in class today. And we have an exercise that you'll go home with, functional fishing. I'll talk about that in more detail. As far as announcements, we have the sign-in sheet has been passed around. If you missed it, you can check your name off. And the recording from last week is available on the course website. Are there any questions before we get started with today's lecture? Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've broken this up into different sections depending on what they're doing. So the first one we're going to talk about is dynamic pages. And this is related to the predefined variables that we're going to discuss. All right, so before we get into the predefined variables, we need to talk about multi-dimensional arrays again. So we talked about arrays last week or the week before that, but we only touched on it briefly, and I want to go over them once again. So arrays can contain other arrays. That's what makes it a multi-dimensional array. Okay, when you have when you have nested arrays, you can create this multi-dimension path. So this is actually very common in programming. Typically, we won't go more than 2 or 3, but you'll definitely have arrays within arrays. Okay, so the thing we have to remember when you're dealing with nested arrays is that we need to add an extra level of notation. Okay, so when we want to get inside of a subarray or a nested array, we need to add that extra level of notation. We'll see an example here in a moment. Okay. And multidimensional arrays are very common in PHP. When you retrieve data from a database, you're going to be retrieving a 2-dimensional array most of the time. Sometimes even more than that. Okay, so here is an example of an array, a multidimensional array. So you can see that contacts is an array, and inside of it, it's an array of arrays. Each array is an associative array, so it means it uses a string instead of a number as its key. You'll see that they have the same structure. Both arrays have the same structure. That's not a necessity, but it's certainly most likely the pattern, because you can kind of see this as a table where your keys, your name and email, become the columns, and each row is the information of the contact. Okay. All right, so that's what multidimensional arrays. That's all we're going to go over. We're going to get some time to practice with them more in our examples, though. Okay, so the first predefined variable we're going to talk about, though, is the get variable. All right, so this is an associative array of variables passed through the query string. Okay, and the query string is referred to the URL variables. So if you ever looked inside of URL and you have that little question mark and then a bunch of stuff afterwards, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the query string or URL variables. It's the same thing. All right, the get array allows us to get those variables. Okay, so these variables can be passed from a form. Okay, so if you filled out a form that's using get method, they can get passed through that, or you can enter them directly into the browser, which is the more common one. Okay, we use the get array to load different templates. So if we had, different pages. So if we had a single template and we want to display different information based off of some criteria, like an ID, we can do that passing this URL variable and using the get array to retrieve that variable and therefore display the information we want. This is actually how WordPress works. We're going to build a very primitive version here in a moment. Okay, so here's an example. Very basic example. So if we were to go to index.php question mark name equals Michael, then our get variable, we could retrieve the value Michael by using $_get and in square brackets name. So take note that the name matches, right? So we have name as the key. So it's name equals Michael. So name there is the key. That's what we're using inside of the array. All right. That's it for the first part of this. Now we're going to do a little hands-on to kind of demonstrate this in a more practical sense. Okay. All right. So if we go out to the course website, mdac.github.io/MTM6405. We'll go to the content page, and we'll go to week 3. Okay. It says PHP requests, and it includes, I keep changing the name of what we're going to be discussing, but it's still the same content. All right, so we have our 2 topics pages there. We have the predefined variables and the PHP includes. You can take a look at those if you have not already. Then we have our assignment exercises. Let me refresh this. It seems to be updated. All right. Time. Okay. I apologize. I may not have posted it. Embarrassing. Okay. Give me one moment. All right, so what we're going to be working on is we're going to work on a little primitive blog, okay? We'll have the starting structure, and we're going to use the URL variables to push the blog, or to view the different blogs posts, okay? So just take a moment to push up, okay? All right, while we're waiting for that to post, let me talk about your assignment because you're going to be doing this right after we do our hands-on. Okay, so your in-class exercise, the participation exercise, is Amazing Adventure. And what you're going to be doing is this is a GitHub Classroom assignment, mostly because there's some starter files I'm providing for you. So you need to accept it so you can download the starter files. Then you're going to create an associative array which will represent each room. Okay, there's a line missing here. You're building a maze. Essentially what you're going to do is you're going to build a maze that people have to walk through. I have designed the maze for you so that we're all working on the same maze and you don't have to spend time making the maze yourself. Okay, you're going to create an associative array to represent each room in that maze. Okay. On the index page, you are going to display the current room's description and action. So each room has an action, which way you can go. You can go north, south, east, west, right? Then the actions will actually be URLs to tell them which room to go to, okay? So each action is actually a URL, and it'll point to the room that we go to. We'll pass it through the URL using the URL variables. Okay, then we'll use the get array to retrieve the current room's information and therefore display it on the page. Okay, you'll submit your URL, and then this is due tonight. Okay, so that's what we're going to be working on momentarily. Let's see if my upload is finished yet. Still working. All right. Whoops. Want to do that. See if I can type up there. All right. So the URL we're going to be going to or bring it up here, so you can see it there, it's github.com/mdac/mtm6405-blog. I know it's a little bit to write. I do apologize. But this is where we want to go to. This is a GitHub repo, and we want to clone this repo to our machine. Like I said, once you got to the page, go ahead and clone the repo. Now, when you're cloning these repositories, you need to make sure that you're saving or at least moving them into your server root directory. So on a Mac, we created an MTM6405 folder, which we then set up to be the root directory for our website, MTM6405.test. Okay, so if we put anything in there, it'll run on our PHP server. If you're on Windows, your Laragon has a root directory. Everything needs to go inside of that root directory to be able to run on the server. Unlike with JavaScript, where we can run directly in the browser, with PHP, we must run through the server. All right, so I'm going to save mine. I'm on the Mac, so I'm going to save mine where I've stored my MTM6405 folder, which is right here. I'm going to select this location. Okay, I'll go ahead and open it. Now we can test to make sure we can view this by going to our browser. And on a Mac, you will go to mtm6405.test/mtm6405-blog. Don't forget that last slash at the end there. Right? And you should see something like that. If you're on Windows, it won't work for me, but on Windows, you will go localhost / then mtm6405-blog. If you put it directly in the root. If you created an mtm6405 folder first, then just follow that path. All right, so this is just a base template of what our blog will look like. We're going to add posts to our blog. We actually already have posts added, but we're going to incorporate them into this template. I'm going to display their content, and their content really just is a title. It's a very basic primitive blog. Arranged here. All right, so let's take a look at the files. There's just two files. There's a README file. We're going to ignore that. But we just have an index.php file and a style.css file. We don't really need to worry about the style.css file. It's just adding some styles. So everything is inside of the index.php file. At the very top of this file, we have a multi-dimensional associative array. Okay, called posts. Everyone see that? I should have asked if everyone got their project cloned and open. Okay, nobody's saying wait, so I'm going to assume that's good. All right, so again, we have this post, which is a multidimensional array. So each post inside of here represents an array. So right here is one array, and for post 1, so that's the array for post 1. Here's the array for post 2. Here's the array for post 3. And here's the array for post 4. Okay? So we have a multidimensional array. Each subarray represents a post. The keys of these posts we'll be using as a slug. Okay, so typically that's what we call a little slug. That's the URL version of a page, which I'll demonstrate here in a moment. Okay, so that's our associative array. Beyond that, the rest of this is just HTML. We're going to insert the post content in the places that they need to go. Okay. All right, so to start with, we need to set up a post that we can work with. So we're just going to work with the first post, and we're going to create a variable to hold just the array for the first post. Okay, so after our post array here, we're going to add another variable called post, and we're going to set it equal to $posts with an S, square bracket, and then we want the key for the post 1, so it's just post-1. Okay, don't forget your semicolon at the end. We need to add semicolons in PHP. All right, so now we have this post variable, which is just kind of an alias to the post1 array. Now we're going to use this post variable to fill in the gaps that we need here. All right, so we're going to scroll down to the article, the header here, the main section. So right here's the header. And what we want to update here is the post here. That's going to be updated with the title. All right, so when we're working with PHP, we can intermix it with HTML. We just add PHP tags where we need to output PHP data. Okay, so we want to replace post here with the title of our post variable. So we'll open up a PHP block. Okay, so it's less than $PHP. Then we'll do echo post square bracket title. Okay, that will give us the title of the post, which is the first post. Don't forget your semicolon and closing up your PHP tag. All right, we didn't do much, but let's make sure that worked. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to my browser. I'm just going to refresh the page. And I'll see that I no longer see post. I see my first post. Okay, good. That's what I want to see. Okay, I know that was small, but it's a good way of making sure that we're testing this, that it works. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to set up our links here for our navigation. So each page has some page navigation, which will allow us to go to the previous post or the next post, assuming that there is a previous or next. Okay, so we're going to set up some logic to make that happen. All right, so the way we need to write our links, I'm going to write our links. We're going to work this kind of backwards because I'm going to write our links and then we'll add the condition around the links. So the way we want to create our links is, again, we're going to be using those URL variables to pass what page we want to go to. In our array, every post has a links array right here, which has a next or previous, or both, depending on whether or not which post is before or after it. Okay, this array and those properties of the array or items of the array will indicate whether or not we have a previous or next to go to. Okay, so we're going to write our first previous would be written like this. Assuming that we have it, it would be, we're going to add our href here. I took them away. Well, actually, wait. Before we do that, we want to make a copy of this because we're going to need a copy. So I'm going to copy this, and we're going to paste it up above. I'll show you why we're going to need a copy of that here in a moment. Okay, so we're going to make a copy of it and put it up above. Then we're going to add our href. And then we'll do question mark, post equals, then the post slug. Okay, we're going to get that information from our post variable, from the links, from the previous. Okay, so it's going to look like this. We're going to do open up our PHP block. We'll do echo post square bracket links, another set of square brackets because we're dealing with a multi-dimensional array here, and then we'll do previous. We're going to close up our quote. So what this is going to look like, I'm going to write it up here on the whiteboard. What this is going to look like when it's actually written out inside of HTML is there will be a question mark, post equals post dash 2 or something like that. Okay? That is what we're building. This part, the post 2 part, is what's variable, and that's what our PHP is determining, what that value will actually be. Okay, so that's the structure we're going to build. Now we need to do a check to make sure that this previous actually is there, because in post 1, it's not. Okay, so if we were to run this, we would actually be getting an error. Okay, we'll get some sort of error. So we don't want that, so we need to run a check around this to make sure that this previous exists. Okay, and we do this like this. So we're going to create another PHP block above it. Okay, and this one's going to contain an if statement. So we're going to do if is set, all one word, is set. This is how we check to see if a variable or a property in an array exists. Okay, is set. So we're going to say is set $post links, square bracket links, square bracket previous. Okay, so we're just checking that exact thing that we were using down below. We're going to check to see if it is there first. If it is there, then we can proceed. If it's not, then we need to do something else. Okay, then we're going to use colons here, and we're going to close it up. So we're going to use a colon and close it up. Now, after our link, so jump between our link where we made that copy, and we have the space in between. This is where we're going to add an else, because if our post doesn't have a previous, then we want to still display the button, but as disabled. Okay, so we're going to add an else here. So we'll do again a PHP block. We'll just type else and then a colon. Then after that second anchor tag, we're going to end our if with end if and a semicolon. All right, so now we got to do one more thing, and I think so what we want this second link to do is we want it to be disabled. So we're just going to add a class here, disabled, right there. Okay. The style sheet will take care of it. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and just save this part right here. Okay. So, and let's go back to our browser and let's just take a look and see what that looks like. All right. It's really small, tiny change, but you will notice that the button here, unlike next, you can see I can hover over it, changes color, but with previous, I cannot. That's because it's adding that disabled class. So it's checking to see that no, there is no previous available. So I'm going to disable this button. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the next button. Same process. In fact, we're just going to do a lot of copying and pasting here. So I'm going to grab my href from my previous. I'm going to copy that. Oh, well, first we got to copy this anchor. I apologize. First we got to copy this anchor so we have a copy of it. Paste that up. Now we can copy that href. We'll paste it in here. And we're going to replace prev with next. Now you can copy that conditional statement. Top. And we'll paste that up. And again, we're going to replace prev with next. All right, so doing the same thing we did above, only we're checking the next property. Then we'll need to add our else in between. And close up our if. And end if. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to add a disabled to our class for our second anchor. All right, let's go ahead. Once you have that, you can go ahead and save it, and you can go back to your browser. Any questions? It looks like there was some confusion. Again, we did exactly what we did up above. Only thing we changed was we changed inside the conditional statement, we changed prev to next. And inside the first anchor, we changed prev to next. Everything else actually stays the same. All right, let's go ahead and save this. And we'll go back to our browser. We'll refresh. And we can see that we now have a link, an active link here, and a disabled link. All right. So if we look, we can hover over. It's really hard to see on my screen. But at the bottom, you can see it's even telling me that's going to go to question mark post equals post dash 2. We can go ahead and click next. And we will see that pop up into your URL. Now, it didn't change anything. Nothing has changed on our page. But we can see that it did add that to our URL. It added that URL variable there. Now that it's there on our page, we can use it. We can grab it using that $_get array, which is what our next step is. Okay. So let's go back to our index.php and let's go to the top of our page. Very top, up to where we created this post variable. Okay. So before that post variable, we're going to add a conditional statement. Okay, we're going to add an if statement. And we're going to check to see if the $_get array has a post inside of it, or a post item, post key. Okay, we're going to check to see if it's set. So we're going to use the isSet function again. Then we'll do $_get post. Okay, so we're checking to see, does it have that post URL variable? All right. If it does, then we're going to set post equal to post square bracket $ underscore get square bracket post. Okay, so we're getting the value that was passed through the URL, and we're passing it as the index that we want from the post array. Now, if get is not set, if there's nothing going past the URL, we're going to default to the first post, which is what we had down here. So we're going to add an else here, and we're going to move this line inside. Any questions about what we did here so far? All right, let's go ahead and save this and go back to your browser. Now, if you had clicked on next, you should still see the question mark post equals post -2. Go ahead and refresh your page. We got an error. Let's see. What is my error? It says on line 33. So we have an unexpected curly brace. Oh, that's because I forgot a semicolon. Been writing too much JavaScript. Okay, so I forgot my semicolon on line 32. So we'll want to save that. We'll go back. We'll refresh our page again. And you'll see that our post title changed to post number 2. That's because we're viewing the second post. Take a look at our links down below. You notice both links down below are active. Okay? One's going previous. Well, that will take us to post 1. Next takes us to post 2. Next is going to take us to post 3. Then we can go to post 4. Okay? So that's all working. All we did was add that little bit of line code at the top. We had worked out everything else. Okay? But there's still some more we're going to do. But is there any questions? Yes. Yeah. For the first post, you won't see that. So go to the. There you go. Yep. Yes. You're just checking to see, does this have a value? Has it been assigned a value? Okay. Is it basically not undefined? Just that specific key. Does that key exist inside of the array in this case? So does the post key exist inside of the get array? Yep. So we're looking at this if statement again. So yeah. So here we're doing if is set. So remember, is set is allowing us to check to see if a variable has a value. And when we apply it to an array, like we're doing here, we're checking to see, essentially, does this key exist? And if it does, it will return true. If it doesn't, it returns false. Okay, so it's going to return true. Then we're going to set the post. Now, one more thing we should probably be doing for good practice is we should also check to see if this exists. All right, so somebody could type in anything. It might not actually be a post slug, and then it will break our site if we don't check for that too. Okay, so we should be checking for that. We can do that as well. So we could copy this, and we can do 2 ampersands. So that's an and. Whoops, and then we do is set. So we're checking to see if that post exists. Then we'll set it to post. Otherwise, we'll always default to post 1. All right, one more thing we're going to do is we're going to update the navigation, the top navigation. So on your page, you will notice that there's some top navigation or a nav bar up here. It just has post we're going to set this up so that we can directly jump to any of the posts. So if we scroll down to the nav bar, which is right in this area, okay, what we're concerned about here is this unordered list, nav bar nav. So here's our LI. We're going to create one of these for each post inside of our posts array. Right? So we are going to repeat this block of HTML. We do that using we can use it using a for loop. What other loop can we use? The for each loop, right? That one's specifically designed for arrays, so it's the one we would prefer because we're going to deal with arrays. So we're going to use a for each loop here to create an LI, a list item, for each post. So we'll open up our PHP block. We'll do for each. Now remember, the for each works the opposite or reverse of the for of loop in JavaScript. So we do the array first. So our array here is posts. Then we do as okay, here's a good getcha moment. Okay, we might want to do post as post. Okay, this would be a reasonable thing to think of. This is my bad because I forgot to fix this. This will not work for us. It will work, but it's going to run into a problem because we're already using post. Okay, we're using post up here. And PHP isn't going to throw an error or anything because it says, well, that's perfectly fine. You can reuse post. But I'm going to override what this is. So we're going to lose all our post data. So we cannot use the same variable there. So we're going to have to come up with a different variable here. So let's just call it P. Okay, we're just going to call it P. Just so it's different than post. Ideally, we'd probably call this top one up like current or something. That's all right. So we're going to call it P. We're going to close up our for each loop. Okay, so we're going to do end for each. Okay, so now this will repeat for each post, but it's not adding anything from the post data. All it's doing is repeating this static HTML. So let's go ahead and replace this static HTML with some actual content. So we're going to replace the href here, the hashtag, with question mark, post equals, and then our PHP block echo p square bracket. Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot a key up here. We need a slug. I'm sorry, slug. Should really look at my notes. So when you're using the for each and you're using it with associative arrays, you often will want to retrieve the key and the value. Okay, so key comes first, then we have our arrow, fat arrow, then our value. Okay, so it's important usually with associative arrays that we retrieve that key. And that's the case in this because that's what we want to echo out here. We want to echo out the slug. All right, then we'll replace post with the post title. So again, we're going to open up another PHP block. We'll do echo p square bracket title. Formatting here to make it a little easier to read. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if that works. We're going to save this. We'll jump back to our browser. We'll refresh. And you should see the posts at the top. Okay, So we have all of the posts, and we can now jump to them all we want. Now, you will notice that all of them are dark. That's because all of them are currently active. They have the active class applied to them. Well, we really only want the one that we're viewing to be active, so let's fix that. This is the last thing we're going to work on. So right here is this active class that's been applied. This is basically only supposed to be on the current page. Well, we can test for that. We can add another conditional statement. Now, this is where things can get a little messy when you're mixing in PHP with HTML, but it becomes very powerful. So we can check to see if slug here matches the we can check to see if slug here matches our get post that's being passed through the URL. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to wrap it around this active class. So it's going to look like this. It's going to get messy here. So I'm going to add some returns to make it a little easier to read. So I'm going to add a PHP block. Then I'm going to add an if statement here. And I'm going to check to see if $_get square bracket post equals 3 equal signs there slug. So we're going to check to see if those match. And I'm going to use a colon to close up or to open up my if statement, basically. Then at the end of active, I'm going to create another PHP block with an end if. All right, everyone got that? I know it looks very messy. This is what you're gonna get into when you're working with PHP. This is quite common, intermixing PHP like this. But again, it becomes very powerful because what we've just done is allowed us to dynamically add the active for just the pages just for the page that is currently active. All right, so if we save that, we go back to our browser, refresh, you should see that the active class is only on the page you're on, not on all of them. All right. Any questions about that? So you can see as you jump from different posts, the active class follows it. All right. Any questions? All right. So for your participation assignment, what you're going to work on right now. Hopefully everyone got it working. Adventure. If you didn't, I will come around and I can help you out. You're going to basically do what we just did onto our participation exercise. All right, so if we go back out to the course website, which I seem to have lost. There it is. Okay, course website. Amazing Adventure. That's what we're going to be working on. Okay, so again, this is a GitHub Classroom assignment, so make sure you accept it on GitHub Classroom and clone the repository. Refresh this. Come on. All right. Okay, so it says convert your HTML page to PHP. Review the provided maze. So there is a maze being provided here that I have created for you, and you're going to build this maze inside of a multi-dimensional associative array. Okay, so that's what the step 4 is all talking about. So this multi-dimensional associative array for the maze, each room should be represented by an array. Each room should have a description and a list of actions. Okay, The room description will go into the response div, and the actions will go into the action div. Each action will actually be a link. Okay. Then, just like we did with our blog, we'll be using the get variable to retrieve the current room. Right. So let me show you what a potential example of this would look like. Okay. You can go to this too, if you wish. So here is the example. So it says our description, you are in room 1, and then we can choose a direction. Which way should we go? East. Okay, so now we're in room 2. Now we can go. We have east, south, or west. South. Okay, we're in room 4. Now we're back to room 1 again. So we went back in circles. All right. So, but that's the whole point. I mean, I don't remember. I wrote this a long time ago. So let's go south. Oh, then we're trapped. Game over. All right. So that's kind of how this will work. Okay. Again, I've already created the maze for you just to save time so you don't have to create one yourself. So follow the maze. Use the same techniques that we did for blog to work this out. I'm going to give you a half hour to work on this on your own, and then we'll come together and we'll work on it. We'll get everyone wrapped up and get it worked on together as a group. So again, take the next half hour and work on Amazing Adventure. Good luck. Okay, so I've given you some time to work on your Amazing Adventure. So we'll come together and we'll work on it as a group. So I've cloned the project and I've opened it up. I started working on it myself. So on the left here, we see that this is the map you were provided. So we can see that there are 9 rooms. Each room has some ways, an entrance or way out of the room, or most of the rooms have a way out of the room, and some rooms have stuff going in. So the arrows indicate the entrance and exits. So you will notice that just because you entered a room does not mean you can get your way back. Okay, the door locks behind you, so to speak. Okay, so that is the map. That's what we're going to be basing our maze on. From our file, so that came from maze.ph or PDF. Inside of our download files, first thing we needed to do is we needed to convert index.html to index.php. I went ahead and did that already. Hopefully everyone knew how to do that. The next step is to create your associative array. Okay, so this will be an array of the rooms where each room is an array in itself. Now you may have structured yours slightly differently than this, but this is how I've structured mine. So again, at the very top we have a rooms array. Okay, it's just it's an array, and it's an associative array with arrays inside. Okay, so each room is represented by an array, and I've added the key representing the room. So here's room 1, room 2, room 3, and so forth. Each room has a description. I've just kept it simple. You are in room 1, you are in room 2, and then it has actions. The actions are also arrays. All right, so my key I've left as the direction. So we have north, east, west, south, and so forth. And then the value is the room that the direction will take you to. Now, you certainly can reverse this. You can choose to have the room as your key and the value be the direction. It actually works both ways as long as you set up the rest of your code the same to work with it. right? And then from that point on, it's just filling out the rest of the rooms. So this took a little bit. That's why I went ahead and did this ahead of time. Are there any questions about creating this array? Okay, so hopefully. You can use double or single quotes. Either are acceptable, okay? It's just a preference. Both will work in this case. Okay, you do have to use the fat arrow equal sign greater than to indicate, to separate your key from your value. But if you used all single quotes, that is perfectly fine. That's acceptable. All right, so assuming that we have our array correct, I'm just going to collapse that down, and I'm going to get rid of my map here because we don't need that anymore. Okay. So now that we have our rooms array, we can start building out the rest of our little maze. The first thing we want to do, I'm just going to work from top down. So the next thing we'd want to do is we want to check to see what room we're in, right? And we're going to do that by checking to see what room has been passed through the URL, if any room has been passed through the URL. Okay? So in order to do this, we'll need to do that conditional statement, right? We'll do an if, whoops, that's too far low. I need to be inside my PHP block. We'll do if. How do we check to see if there are URL variables? We use the isSet, but what array? What allows us to get access to those URL variables? The get array, right? Yeah. So we'll do isSet $_get, and then we're going to check for room, right? We haven't even set that, but we know we're going to be passing a room through. Okay. I'm going to use double quotes here. I'm going to try and stay consistent. Okay, so double quotes. We should also be checking, we're going to check to see, has a room been passed? We should also check to see, is this a valid room? Okay, so after that, we'll want to check to see if it's a valid room. So then we do another isSet, and this time we'll do it off of the rooms array. Okay, so this will be our key. The value of room through the URL is the key for the rooms, the specific room that we're looking. So if both of those are valid, then we can set our room, and our room will equal it will equal the room. So we can do rooms, get, semicolon. Okay. Now, if that condition does not validate, if no room is passed, or if it's not a valid room, we want to set them at the start. So their start would be room 1. Okay, so we're going to set room to room 1. We'll do room 1. Just like we did for our blog just a moment ago. Any questions about that? Just getting this out of the way. All right, so we have our rooms array created. We have our if statement set up so that it's going to check for any URL variables that are being passed. Now we want to go down to our body and we want to update this so that it's dynamic and associated with the room that we're currently on. Okay, so now that we have our rooms array and we have our conditional statement that's going to check to see which room we're on, now we can update the body. So we're going to replace "you are in the library" with our room description. Okay, so again, when we're working with PHP, we need the PHP block. So let's go ahead and set that up. So we'll create a PHP block. We use the echo statement to echo out the description of the current room. So we use room. Then we can do description or, right? Now I'll put that. Simple enough. Now we go to our actions. Now for our actions, we can set this up using a for each loop. So we're going to use a for each loop to loop through all of our actions. And then we can use both the key and the values to indicate the title or the text of the button as well as the URL that it will go to. Okay, so we'll create a for each loop. Again, PHP block. We'll do for each. We start again with the array. Okay, so we're going to start with rooms as, then we'll got our key value pair. Okay, so the first one is the direction. So I'm just going to call that D. And the other one is the room. So I'm going to call that one R. D and R. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not rooms. We want this to be the array of actions. So this should be room actions. Like that. Okay. Then we'll keep one anchor tag because that's what we're going to be duplicating. And we'll close up our for each loop. End for each. And the remaining anchor tags, we can just get rid of those. We don't need them. Now, the last part is we just need to update our anchor. Okay, so we will update our anchor here. So we're going to update the href. We'll do question mark room equals then the room it's going to go to, which is being stored in the R variable, but we still need a PHP block to output it. So we do PHP block echo R and close it up. Then our direction north here will get replaced with D. So then we do echo D. And that's it. That's all there is to it. We can test it out. Should always test it out. So let's test it out. Go ahead and save this. Go to the browser. Where did I store it? Right there. I'm going to refresh. Okay, so I'm in room 1. Which way do I go? North, right? Room 3. Going north again. We'll go east. South. We go east, south, and south. Okay, there we go. Any questions about this assignment? Okay, all right, so we do have some more information to cover. So hopefully everyone was able to get their amazing adventure completed. And if you have, then you can go ahead and submit it. All right, so, but like I said, we do have more to cover. That's not what we're covering. We're covering this. Okay, so amazing adventure. We did that. So again, you have until tonight to submit that. Okay, so moving on. We're going to talk about form handling. Okay, so when you fill out a form, you'll fill out some data and you'll submit it. You can submit through using the get method, and that would be passing the data that you filled out through the URL, which is what we just worked with, right? The get method. The more common way is to use the post method, though. So the post method, when you fill out a form, you fill out the post method, it will send the data through the post protocol. So it's not through the URL. Okay? And when you pass variables to the post protocol, PHP will allow you access to it using the $_post array. Okay? And again, this is the best way to secure information. Almost anything that is vital should be passed through post. So unless you're doing like a search or something that's non-trivial, then, or excuse me, that is non-trivial, you should be using post. Okay, so here's an example of using the post method. So you can see at the form at the top, that's just an HTML form, but take note that it using the method post. By default, forms submit using get. So you must add method equals post to your form to submit through the post method. Then we have an input here with a name and a value. On the PHP side, once the form has been submitted, you can retrieve the post value using the post array and then the name of the input, in this case username, and that will give you the value. Very similar to what we did with get, only using a different protocol. Okay, so that's post. Next thing we're going to be talking about is sessions. All right, so with sessions, sessions are a way of storing information across multiple pages. So HTML by default is stateless. It doesn't remember things. You go from one page to the next, it doesn't remember what you were, who you are, or anything. So we've devised ways of storing information to make HTML more stateful. Okay? One way is to use cookies. We're not going to really be using cookies in this class, but if you're interested in learning how you write cookies with PHP, you can take a look at that. But we are going to be using sessions. That's the other way. So sessions are like cookies. The big difference is that the data that is stored in a session is being stored inside of, is being stored on the web server, not the user's computer, which is what cookies do. The advantage of this is that we can store a lot more data in a session than you can in a cookie. Okay. In order to use sessions inside of PHP, we must call the session start function. And this must be called before any session use inside of PHP. Once that's been called, you can retrieve session data using the $_ it says server. I apologize. That's wrong. It should be session. $_ session associative array. And that will give you access to any session variables available to the current script. Okay. You can also use the session, again it says server, apologize. You can also use the session, $_session, to store new session variables as well. Okay, so let's see an example here. So here's our example. We have at the top one is page 1.php. You can see we have session start right at the top. Then we are setting a session variable. So $_session, name equals Michael. So we're adding a new session variable with a value. Then header here, by the way, header location allows you to redirect to a new page. That's what we're doing. We're redirecting to page 2. So then in page 2.php, we open up the session start again. Even though we did it in page 1, we still have to do it on page 2, okay? Because they're separate scripts. So every script must open session start, okay? This is a good indication for using, this is a good case point for using includes, which we'll talk about here in a moment. So then from page 2, we will echo out session name and it will return Michael. So it remembers that variable across pages. Again, without sessions or cookies, we wouldn't have this ability because HTML or PHP doesn't remember things from page to page. All right. Any questions about post or session? I went through this very briefly. We're going to have a big example to go through this in detail. But any questions over the overview? Okay, real quick, we're going to talk about includes. This will be brief, and then we're going to jump into our other example, other hands-on. Okay, includes. PHP has statements which allow us to basically include external documents into a PHP script or PHP document. We can include all sorts of documents too. It's not just PHP documents. You can include HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There are others, but those are the most common ones because we're just going to be dealing with those 4. Okay? Most common, you're going to be including other PHP files. Now, there are 4 statements that we can use to include. Include, include only, require, and require only. Okay? So we have 4 statements. There are slight differences between all 4, which I'll show here in a moment. Okay, here we go. So very top, include. Include can be used to include a file. If that file does not exist, PHP will attempt to continue going without it. That's it. You can include that file multiple times. Okay, so we could keep including that file multiple times with include. With include once, again, if the file doesn't exist, PHP will attempt to continue going, but it will do a check to see if that file has been included already and it won't include it again. Okay, so make sure it only includes it once. With require, require will include the file, but if the file doesn't exist, PHP will automatically throw an error and halt, okay, because it assumes that this file is vital and it won't continue. You can include the file multiple times with require. Then we have require once. Again, it will check to see if, just like include once, it will check to see if the file has been included already. If the file doesn't exist, it will throw an error and halt. Okay, so that's the differences between the two. The most common one to use, or the one you probably should use most often, is require or require once. Okay. The only time you'd use include or include once is if it's kind of a variable, it's non-essential, and it's not crucial that you have it, or it might not always be there, and you do want to continue even if it's not. There are reasons to use it. But most of the time, we'll probably use require. All right, so that's a brief overview. Now we're going to go into our hands-on. Yeah. Okay, we are definitely not going to have time to complete all of this. So we're going to get through as much as we can. And then I think I'm going to push stuff to next week. Okay, we crammed in about 2 weeks worth of material in a single week. And it just wasn't possible. So I think we're going to move stuff to next week as well. We're going to get started. We're going to just continue next week. This also means that your assignment, which I'll talk about here in a moment, won't be due next week. You'll get an extra week or so on that one. Okay, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So let's talk about what we are going to be working on. Now, hopefully this thing has been updated now. So if you go back to the course website and go to week 3, you may need to refresh. You should see now additional resources. Under there, you'll see the blog and blog complete. So if you weren't able to get blog working, there is a completed version available for you. But what we're going to be working on now is Blacksmith. Again, there is a completed version of Blacksmith as well. Okay, so these are GitHub repositories. So we can go ahead and click on them. Yes, we're clicking on Blacksmith. All right, so Blacksmith is a text-based game. It's in the browser, but it's a text-based game that we're going to be working on. Okay. So go ahead and clone or download, or clone, excuse me, I don't know why I'm saying download, clone the repository to your machine. So we'll copy that, go back to this code, and we'll clone it down. And again, you want to store it inside of your working directory for PHP because it will need to be run through PHP. All right, so there is a lot to this game. It is a quite complex game, certainly more than what we have time for. But the gist is that you are a blacksmith and you use ore and wood to create axes, swords, and staffs, that which you then sell for gold so that you can buy more wood and ore. And it just continues forever until you run out of money, I guess. Or what's that? Yes. This is, if we have done Blacksmith, I believe we've done Blacksmith using JavaScript. Now we're using PHP. Same concept. All right, so inside of our repository, we have CSS, we have some JavaScript, we have a blacksmith.php, which is what we're going to be working on. This is where all of our functions and logic are going to go. We have an index.php, which is our main file. This is what the player is going to see and what they're going to be being on. Then we have the README file, which has some instructions. And then we have this settings.php file. The settings.php file is purely for setting some settings for this game because there's a lot of conversion, how much things are worth, what do we need to get ore, what do we need to get wood. That's what this settings file is all about. Okay, so it's all it is this one constant variable that's in here. We haven't really talked about constants. It's not something we're going to use all that often in this course. But basically, a constant is something that once you set, you can't change it, just like in JavaScript. Inside of PHP, we set it with the define function. Okay. All right, so that's an overview. If you go ahead and open up this project in your browser, so let me get this set up, and then we'll go back to my browser. We'll go to MTM6405-black. We're going to be building it. This is not to be submitted. This is to help you with your functional fixing exercise that you're going to be doing. Functional fishing or blacksmith? We're going to start now. Okay, so if you look at Blacksmith or open it up in your browser, you'll get this. I do want to point this out. You will get an error right away. functional fishing, you will get an error right away on this. Okay? This error will occur, and it has to do with the fact that you need to do a few steps to get this removed. Okay? So, those are the steps we're going to work on right now to get this removed. But I just want you to not panic when you get an error right away. Again, with functional fishing, you'll get a very similar error. These two projects were built basically using the same technique. Okay, so we need to bring up, not that, go. All right, so hopefully everyone has good enough time for everyone to have their project open. Now, we're going to go to index.php, and we are going to include a few files inside of index.php. Remember, this is our main file. This is the file that the user is going to be going to. This is the file that our PHP server will be compiling. So everything else that is related to our project needs to be included into this. Okay, so for this project, that means we need to include settings.php and blacksmith.php. So we're going to do this at the top of our document. So right at the beginning, we're going to open up a PHP block, and now we're going to include both of these files. Now, both of these files are crucial for our application to work. So because they're crucial, which statement should we use? We should use require or require once. Now, we can just use require. Require once is typically if you're working with a very large project and you're not sure if things are being included or not, you can use require once. But this is a small project. We know what's going to be required. We're only dealing with a few files, so we can use something like that. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to use require to include our settings and blacksmith. So we'll do require, and then inside of quotes, we'll put settings.php. Then we can do require blacksmith.php. Now, it is important that you put them in that order. Okay, we do need settings first because that settings constant, that array of our different conversions, needs to be available for the functions that we're going to be writing in Blacksmith. All right, so now that we have our settings.php and blacksmith.php included, let's go ahead and save this file, and let's go back to our browser. Let's refresh, and we should see that the errors are still there, but they did change. Okay, so we did change because we're getting different errors now, and that's okay. But I just wanted to show you that we did fix one error, and now we have another one. So the first error was that it couldn't find a function that we were attempting to call. And that is this right down here. Okay, so right here, it's checking, it's doing some checks here for us. And it's getting a response and it's updating a response right here. These two functions, they are inside of blacksmith.php. And because we hadn't included it, those functions didn't technically exist. Now they do. But we're still missing something else. We're missing another function which we need to write. I'm explaining this in detail because you're going to have the same thing. You're going to need to do the same thing for functional fishing. All right, so now that we've included both settings and blacksmith, let's go ahead and go to blacksmith.php. This is where all of our work is going to happen. So this is not an empty file. There's lots of code in here already. There's lots of starter code. All right, so at the top, there's this clear session function. I'll explain what that is here in a moment. Okay, same with this. That goes with clear session. We have get response. Get response you will not be using directly, but it is utilized to get the response that is returned once a command is entered. It'll make sense once you get further into the game. Then we have update response. Update response is a function we are going to be using. Anytime a command is issued, that command will have a response returned, and we will need to call update response with that response. Okay? Again, it will make a little bit more sense. Right here is where our error is causing. It's trying to look for this create game data function. Well, that function doesn't exist yet because we need to write it. Okay? It will be the function that creates the data for our game. So if you remember back in Introduction to JavaScript, we would have a game object. Same concept. Okay? We're going to have an array that holds all of our status. Now, because we're going to be going from page to page, so to speak, because our page is going to get refreshed many times, we're going to store all of this game data into session so that it is persistent. Right? Then there's a help function, which just kind of lists the instructions for the game. Okay, so under your code below, this is where we're going to get started. I've added some comments to let us know which functions we need to create and what we're going to be creating. So first function we're going to need to create is create game data. Creates a new session of data. Okay, so we're going to create a new session, and this session is going to hold an array of all of the items that we need to keep track of for the game. Yes, it's a PHP array. We're working with PHP here. Okay, but the first thing we need to do is create a function. How do we create a function inside of PHP? We're already inside a PHP tag. That's a good call. We are inside a PHP tag, so we don't need that. We already there. What comes after that? Function, right? Then the name of the function. Well, the name of the function we're looking for is create game data. So create game data. Then we do parentheses, and we'll do a set of curly braces. Now, what this function is going to be doing is it's going to create a new session for us. How do we create a new session? I know, it was like on a slide for like 30 seconds. Who remembers what we need to do before we even work with sessions? We need to do the session start, right? We need to call session start. It is always best to call session start at the very top of your PHP file. So we're going to go back up to the top, very top, even above starter code, and we're going to type in session underscore start. That will start the session for us so that we can start creating a session, creating session data. So again, go to the top of your page right after your PHP block and add session underscore start. Then we'll scroll down and we'll go back to our create game data, and now we can create our session data. So we do that with the $_ underscore session variable. So $_ underscore session. Okay. Now we want to, this session is an array, and we're going to add a new item to that array. So we do that with bracket notation. And this is an associative array, so we provide it with the key or the name of the item. And we're going to call it Blacksmith, since that's the name of our game. Now, the Blacksmith item inside the session array is going to be an array itself. And it's going to be not just an array, but it's going to be an associative array, and it's going to have several items in it. Okay, so just bear with me because I'm writing these up. So it's going to be response, and response will be an array. So we're just going to set it to an empty array right now. Then we're going to have gold. This will keep track of the amount of gold we currently have. We're going to preset that to 15. Then we have wood. And wood, again, keeping track of the amount of wood we have, that will be set to 0. Then we have ore. Again, going to be using that for weapons. Then we have swords. Sorry, sword, singular. That'll be set to 0. We have axe, will be set to 0. And staff. There's a reason why these are singular. They'll make sense later. Just forgot a comma up here. That'll also be set to 0. The last item is fire. And this is a Boolean, so it's going to be set to false. So that is our session. That is our data that represents the status of our game. We will be using this, we'll be updating this session constantly as actions occur inside of our game. Okay, now that we have our session created, don't forget your semicolon at the end. And the last thing we want to do is we want to return a Boolean. Okay, so a true or false from our create game data. Boolean is true or false. That's what it is. It represents two values, true or false. Okay, so it's either true or it's false. We're going to return a Boolean, and what we're going to return is whether or not our session was created. Okay, so we do that by doing return, and we use that all-powerful isSet function to check to see that our session, Blacksmith, is set. Now, we just set it, so it should be, but maybe something catastrophically bad went wrong and it wasn't set. But in most cases, it should be set. Okay, we'll do that. All right, so let's go ahead and save our blacksmith.php, and let's go back to our browser and let's refresh. Okay, so assuming that you've typed everything correctly, you should get this. If you did not, there's a couple things you need to do. First thing, you need to check to see if you're getting some errors, see if you can find those errors. If the errors seem to be fixed, it is possible that your session has stored the error in it. This is actually quite common with this structure. It will also occur with functional phishing. So I've added a feature. This is new. You guys are the first one to experience this. Low down at the bottom, it says clear session. You can use this to clear your session data. This will wipe out any wonkiness in your session. So if you're finding like errors appearing, like error messages appearing inside of your box here, that can happen if one error occurred and then it just got stored in your session. With the way this game works, that can happen. So you might have to clear your session. Before, you'd have to close your browser, quit your browser, reopen it. This is actually much easier. So you just click clear session, that'll clear your session, you have a whole new session started. So just note that, again, if you get your sessions going wonky, just hit that clear session and you're good to go again. I think this is as far as we're going to go today. Okay? So functional phishing, I'm going to talk about it, but it's not really going to be assigned. You're more than welcome to take a look at it and attempt to work on it, but its due date will be extended because we just didn't get far enough today. And again, it was a lot to cover one day. So let's go ahead and I'm going to talk about functional phishing, and then we'll call it a day. All right, so where's my slides? There's my slide. Okay, so functional phishing. Again, won't be due, but we'll talk about it. So this is a GitHub Classroom assignment. You're going to be creating an interactive game of functional phishing. So who remembers functional phishing from Introduction to JavaScript? Same game, only we're building it with PHP. Okay. Actually, a lot of the stuff is exactly the same. We're going to use session to store the game status. You'll use a form and the post array to get the player's commands. That's what we're going to be doing with Blacksmith, which we'll talk about some more next week. You'll use the provided functions to complete the game. And this is not going to be due next week. Okay, you will get an extension. Well, we're not really going to assign it, but it will definitely not be due. Okay, probably have at least an extra week. So that's that. I do encourage you to go ahead and clone this down. You can start doing what we just did for Blacksmith, because you'll need to do those same things. You can try and keep going with it and see if you can figure out even more. Okay, but it will not be due next week. Any questions? All right. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to discuss next time. We are going to be continuing working on Blacksmith. I will dedicate probably at least an hour of next week to work on Blacksmith, so we have a good way to go with that. In addition to that, we're going to be covering databases and SQL. This is not a really deep dive into them, so we should have time for both. Okay, so we're going to cover database and SQL. We may have the participation assignment, and the Sociology DB 1 exercise will probably get bumped, okay, to accommodate for functional fishing. But that was the plan for next time. Are there any questions before I let you go? Do not forget about hybrid number 1. I believe it is due next Monday. Okay, so if you haven't been working on that, you need to watch 10 videos from the tips, tricks, and techniques in PHP. Okay, it's look at the assignment page. The link is there. It's on LinkedIn Learning. So you need to watch 10 videos and write a short 1 to 2 sentence description on what you learned from each video. Okay, so for each video, you need to write a sentence. Okay, and that is, what's it? Right, just in like, on Word or whatever. Right. Yep. Yeah, you're not going to write it in a text editor. Just write it in Word. I learned that you could do this in PHP. Okay. Yeah, so it's a lot of interesting stuff. A lot of stuff we're not going to cover. There's so much about PHP we're just not able to cover. Just not enough time. So a lot of these hybrids are meant to give you some exposure to all that extra stuff. Okay. All right, so any questions before we wrap up? Okay, so that's all I've got. There's just a few minutes left of class, so hopefully you can do as you wish. That's all I got. So I'll see you next week.